On a previous episode of the Workers Podcast, we started our look at severance payment. We learned several things. Number one, that severance is due upon redundancy and also when the company changes ownership. We also learned that where employers fail to pay severance, employees can take the matter to a court of competent jurisdiction to recover severance payment. Now on this episode, we'll learn about interest payment on severance. Let's dive in. So we were still with the whole idea of severance, but there's another term that I'm seeing here on the part for temporary termination. Tell us, what is that about and how does that relate to severance?
Okay, so a company may be going to a bind at this time, and they don't want to close the doors. So they want some relief. The number of workers they have on hand, they may want to reduce it to, try and rebuild. And so you don't have to immediately make the employee's position redundant and pay them their severance pay.
Okay.
So the law allows that persons can be temporarily terminated. So there are two ways that you can be temporarily terminated. So the law provides that you can be temporarily terminated without a date of recall. But if 3 months expire and you're not recalled, then you become automatically entitled to your severance pay.
Oh, okay. Stick a pin there. Is that what many people would commonly refer to as being laid off? Is that the same thing? Okay.
Yes, that's the same thing.
Okay.
You are temporarily terminated, so no date of recall is given. After 3 months expire, you become entitled to your severance pay. The second occasion that you may be temporarily terminated is with a date of recall. So there are two parts to this now.
Okay.
So if you are temporarily terminated and the date of recall is given to be 6 months into the future, you become entitled to your severance pay immediately.
So you could get severance and then be recalled?
No. Well, it will be fresh hire.
Okay, yes.
So you're temporarily terminated. The employer gives a date. What we're in? We are now in June?
June, yes.
So at the end of June, 30th of June, the employer temporarily terminates you. And say your return date is the 1st of January 2025. That's 6 months into the future.
Yeah.
So automatically you become entitled to your severance pay. So if you're going to terminate someone with a date of recall, it has to be within 6 months. It can't be 6 months or more into the future.
Yeah.
So it has to be short of 6 months. So it can be temporarily terminated with a date of recall 5 months into the future. You're not entitled as yet to your severance pay. If that date comes, and when you show up for work, your employer says to you, I don't have any work for you. Things are still bad. Then you become entitled to your severance pay. Right? Otherwise, you're not entitled to your severance pay as yet.
Okay.
You see? So those are the two instances when it comes to temporary termination with a date of recall. If it is given to be 6 months or more into the future, you become entitled automatically. If it's short of 6 months, when that day comes and the employer doesn't have any work for you, it's for the employer to immediately now pay you your severance pay.
Okay.
Right? So there are actually 3 parts to temporary termination. To be clear, 3 parts. 1, termination without a date of recall. Temporary termination without a date of recall. 3 months expire, you're not recalled, you're entitled to your severance pay. You're terminated with a date of recall. It is stated to be 6 months or more into the future, you become entitled to your severance pay. Secondly, you're terminated with a date of recall. It is short of 6 months, when the employer gives you notice that you ought to return to work, then you ought to return back to work. Now, you have to look at the language of the letter too, because what the employer may write, you may be recalled on or before this particular date. Right? So you may be recalled on or before. So I'm temporarily terminating you on the 1st of July. But you may be recalled on or before the 30th of November. When that day comes, you ought to report back to work. If you don't, then it would be for the employer to write you and let you know that you were due to return to work at this time. We haven't seen you. Please return to work by a particular time. And you don't report to work by that time, then you're now taken into another realm. And that is the realm where the employer can claim that you have abandoned your job.
Okay.
Right? Abandonment is not an event. Abandonment is a process. Right? So the employer need to notify you that, look, you're due back to work on this particular date. We haven't seen you. Please report to work by a particular date, and they ought to give you a reasonable time. Circumstances are going to dictate what is reasonable time. And then they don't see you on that date given, then they can come to the conclusion that you're no longer interested in the job. You have voluntarily quit or you have abandoned the job. Abandonment is a legal term. It's something that the courts, it's a common law principle. It's something that the courts have ruled on time and time again. So you can claim abandonment as an employer. You can also state you have voluntarily quit the job, because that is a term that is used in the labor code.
Okay.
Where an employee can voluntarily quit his job by resigning. And let me just put on the card while we're talking about resignation. Resignation must be actual.
Meaning?
You are my manager. We have an incident at work. I say to you, boy, I'm resigning. And I leave your office. And you don't see me. I've not resigned. I need to write you and tell you I'm resigning the job. That's why we talk about resignation must be actual. It must be in writing to your employer, letting the employer know I'm quitting the job, whether immediately or sometime in the future. Now, if you're quitting immediately and you don't give the requisite notice, your employer can recover that notice pay, but not by withholding any monies that is due to you.
Such as vacation.
Such as vacation pay.
Okay.
He has to sue you for it. Only if in your letter of employment there was a statement in it that says, you have to give me a month's notice to quit. If you don't give me sufficient notice, any monies I have for you, I'll withhold the equivalent your notice was short by. Only on that occasion, the employer can withhold any monies that you're entitled to upon leaving the job, such as vacation pay or final paycheck. Otherwise, he can't withhold those monies. To recover them, he needs to sue you.
Okay, so let's jump in again. We're still on part 4 of Division C. Another term I'm seeing here is payment of interest, and I suppose this has to do with interest on severance.
Right. So if you are terminated and your severance is not paid upfront, the aggrieved employee can claim interest, and the law provides for interest to be paid. When eventually that payment is made to you. And I think the law may have set interest at 10% per annum
Okay.
on the amount outstanding. And so that is what some employers need to be aware of, because you may not realize, but you're increasing your indebtedness to the employee.
Yeah.
And so you're already strapped for money while you are making positions redundant. But with you not paying that severance pay on time,
Yeah.
you find yourself now big tax
Yeah.
with interest on that outstanding severance pay.
So the employee would be well within his right, even if he chooses to go the route of suing the employer to sue for
To
the
claim,
severance plus
to
the
claim the
interest.
interest, yeah, to
Okay.
claim the interest also, because the law gives him the authority to
Yeah.
do so. And the law says that the employer can be taxed via interest for not paying the severance pay on time.
Okay.
See?
Now, another area that I wish to look at, which I suppose is related to a point that you spoke on earlier, when you explained that the first option should not be termination, should be to find
Alternative
alternative
employment
work.
for that person.
So I'm also seeing here that there's also an option for lowering of pay because of redundancy.
Right. That is what I spoke about.
Yeah.
It is the employer's duty to find alternative employment for you, even if it is at a low rate.
Yeah.
That is what I mentioned earlier. And the law speaks about that. The law gives the authority for doing that. So it's not me saying so.
I've always heard, especially since entering the world of work even younger, that your salary could never go down. It must only go up. But now this is going against. Well, I guess for good reason, since termination is a much worse outcome.
But remember, I said, when time comes for your final termination due to redundancy,
Yeah.
your severance pay is calculated at the higher rate.
Yes. Yes.
So
yes.
in effect, you're not losing much.
Yeah.
You'll be losing on your weekly or monthly rate. But in the final analysis, when time comes for severance pay to be paid, it is calculated at the older, higher rate. Now, yes, it is a situation where your pay is reduced, and as you said, from the time you knew yourself and you have entered the world of work, they say that your pay cannot be reduced. But as you said, it is for a reason.
Yeah.
It is to give the business a little breathing space, and still to give you, the employee, some income. Wouldn't it be better for you to receive some sort of remuneration than nothing at all?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that is what the drafters of the legislation looked at. You know, don't terminate the person, because, some people use redundancy or try to use redundancy as a weapon
Yeah.
against employees. The relationship break down, and so they say, now is an opportune time for me to get rid of you. Let me say that there's a redundancy situation. But again, you have to be careful when you're making a person's positions redundant, because the duties that that individual was performing ought not to be given to any other person, whether you call it by a different name.
But realistically, how would an employee prove that? If
That-
if an employee is suspicious that they're being made redundant for reasons other than true redundancy, I mean, how do they make a case to prove that, for example, their duties are being passed on to someone else?
It has been determined by the court, that has happened,
Okay.
The famous judgment of Jennifer Watt versus Antigua Village Condo. That judgment showed that the company was losing monies. The financial statement showed that the company was losing monies.
Okay.
But it's how they went about effecting the redundancy.
Wow.
She was the only one who was terminated. And her duties were given to two other persons. She was able to prove that. And she was able to recover a handsome amount. Even though she worked for a very short time. Not a very short time, but for a short time.
Yeah.
Right? And so there are ways of means where employees can show that, look, I was made redundant. Look, my duties were given to other persons. So there wasn't a real redundancy situation.
Yeah.
And as the courts have said over the years, there's a very fine line between redundancy and unfair dismissal. So it's the process in which you adopt to effect the redundancy that becomes important.
Yeah.
Not just saying that the position is going to be made redundant, but what process have you adopted in effecting the redundancy? So you talk about the system that you use or the process must be an objective system. So some people employ the process of last in, first out. Some, if they do regular performance appraisal, they may use performance appraisal to make that determination. But what you have to show to the tribunal is that you employed a fair system of selection in making persons redundant. And that is what is important. This process that you adopt in making persons' position redundant. If you fail in that way, you're going to have a bill to pay.
And what I'm seeing is that the labor code is such a powerful and fair tool in governing these matters of employment and labor relations.
I was facilitating a session last week, and it was a session of employers and their representative. And, one of them, I know the gentleman, he's an employer. And he said, look, this labor code is so one-sided. And my response was this, and my response has always been, the labor code is a fair and balanced document. But what it does, it recognizes the stronger and weaker party in the relationship.
Oh, yes.
And in recognizing the stronger and weaker party, it gives some leeway to that weaker party.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it talks about an employer must keep work accounts. If you as an employer, the law puts the obligation on you as an employer to keep work accounts. If you don't, and a dispute arises, I don't have the evidence from you to say whether the employee is right or wrong. Where's the work accounts that you're obligated by law to keep? And so without those records, you'll find that the tribunal lean more towards the employee. Because you as the employer who had the obligation to keep the work records, you don't have them. The question may arise, are you into trickery? Do you want to trick the employee?
Yeah.
And so you don't keep work records. And so, as I said before, it's a balanced document, but it recognizes the stronger and weaker party in the relationship.
Okay.
And that is what it does.
Now, before we wrap this session, are there any other highlights on the part 4 that you think we should expound on or pay any closer attention to?
Probably what I could say is that
Okay.
if you have a predecessor and successor employer, both become liable for the severance pay. Both the predecessor and the successor becomes liable for the severance pay. So what would be good? If severance pay is to be paid, both should agree who to pay it. And if there's an agreement as to who should pay it, and they don't pay, then the other one pays it and recover it
Okay.
from the one
Yes.
who what it was agreed would pay. And just don't leave the employees hanging
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Because the law puts the onus on both predecessor and successor employers to pay the severance pay.
Okay.
That is important because you'll find situations happening where the predecessor says, no, it's the successor who is supposed to pay. And so go after him. But as an employee,
employee is left in limbo.
in limbo.
Yeah.
So for me as an employee, I'm going to sue both of you
Yeah.
for my severance pay. Because the law says both of you become liable for my severance pay. And so I don't care what agreement you two came to
Yes.
with the payment of severance pay. I'm interested in my severance pay. And so I'm coming after both of you to recover my severance pay. And I think that is important.
I think what stands out to me from this session is that employees, especially in cases where severance has been delayed or not paid, they have a legal option which they should utilize. And I hope all the employees in Antigua and Barbuda are listening, especially those who may find themselves in that situation. That's one point that really stood out to me. Now, before we go, just remind us, what are 2 other key points that you think our audience should remember in this review of part 4 of Division C of the Labor Code?
1, if you are entitled to your severance pay and your employer has not paid you your severance pay, go after your employer for your severance pay. The law says that once you're entitled to your severance pay, you can recover that severance pay through civil proceedings in any competent court. 2, if you are terminated due to redundancy and you receive your severance pay, if you are rehired by that company, you become a new employee. So don't go a couple of years down the road and argue for a severance pay for the full period that you were employed
Yeah.
with the old employer and the new employer. You'll only be entitled to severance pay for the period you were employed with the new employer. And to employers, when you are making positions in your organization redundant, please remember, termination is not the first option. Alternative jobs, you ought to look at that. And if there are no alternative jobs, then you can offer the employees an alternative job at a low rate, or if there are no alternative jobs, you can pay the severance pay. And try and make certain that you have the severance pay to pay. I would advise you, don't let the law force you or push you to establishing a severance fund. You as an employer can start establishing a severance pay fund for your employees
Okay.
by probably on a monthly basis or an annual basis,
Yeah.
you move some monies into an account and put that aside for the payment of severance pay if the need ever arises.
Wow. Wow.
That is my suggestion to employers.
Excellent. Well, it's been a very enlightening conversation, and of course, just sharing your words of advice to employees and employers. I'm sure we got incredible value from everything you were able to share here with us. Because of course, Mr. Kentish, you are a walking body of knowledge when it comes to labor matters here in Antigua and Barbuda. Again, I want to thank Mr. Pascal Kentish, the Deputy Labor Commissioner, for being a part of the Workers Podcast. And again, today we looked at part 4 of Division C of the Labor Code, which has to do with severance pay. Again, thank you for joining us. And again, thank you, Mr. Kentish, for being a part of this program. Well, do remember, the Workers Podcast comes to you every Friday. New video is uploaded on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. Thanks again.